Welcome to Next of Kin, the Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Emma. I'm a British expat living in Dubai, UAE, with my partner and baby girl. Join me on my expat motherhood journey. I'll be discussing different topics each week and we'll be joined by some wonderful guests. Now, if you're a mum, you're short on time, so let's jump right in. Welcome back. For this week's episode, I'm joined by the wonderful Millie, who you might already be following on Instagram at consciously.montessori. I already recorded the episode yesterday and we had such a great chat, and I know that we cover a lot, so I will try to keep this intro very short. I reached out to Millie because I was really enjoying following her Instagram account where she documents how she is implementing the Montessori approach at home with her son, Rupert, who is one. Personally, I learned a lot of useful tips from rotating toys to also reminding me to take a step back instead of always jumping in to help Bonnie with something. Actually, that's something we'll get into on the episode. So that's why I was very keen, for entirely selfish reasons, to get Millie on the podcast to teach me more. Millie is very well placed to be advising on all things Montessori because she has a bachelor's degree in early childhood education as well as a master's in psychology, and she can give that honest mum's perspective. As always, we'll also discuss her own expat motherhood journey because I just love discussing this with all of our guests. Right, I'll stop rambling now, on to the episode. Millie, thank you for joining Next of Kin Parents Podcast today. I am so excited to talk to you about all things Montessori. I don't really know that much. I thought that I did know what Montessori is, and we actually had a nanny come to interview, and she was certified in Montessori. And I was nodding along, pretending like I knew what she was going on about. And then as soon as she left, my partner was like, "So what is Montessori?" And I was like, "Well, it's wooden toys." And I realized I really didn't know that much. So I am genuinely so excited to talk to you because I, as a mum, need to know all of this. So tell me, before we get into everything, how has your weekend been?
My weekend has been good. We started swimming again with my son, Rupert, after the summer, which is always lovely to see him in the water. And having been in the UK where it was cold and wet most of the time and we were desperate to get in the sea, finally back in pools and swimming in the sea, so it was lovely. We had 6 weeks in the UK and in nature and outside, and it was a real shock to the system to come back to, what is it, like 46 degrees or something, 50 the other day.
Yeah, we're just being Brits, aren't we, talking about
Yeah, it's true.
So let me jump into then. I'm going to do the quick fire. Well, I always call it quick fire. It's never quick fire, so you don't have to be quick in your answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to jump into my 5 questions. And let's start with the bare bones. Can you explain the Montessori approach in really simple terms for those who just aren't familiar with it at all?
Absolutely. So the key idea about the Montessori approach is that it is child-led. It sees children as unique individuals who, even as newborns, have something to offer to society, to our families, rather than being kind of adults in the making. Our role as adults is to kind of educate and be a controlling influence. Rather, it's a kind of collaborative experience of childhood, and trying as much as possible to listen to children. So whether that's their cues when they're nonverbal, or taking time to actually try to understand what children are wanting to tell us when they are verbal. The idea of the Montessori philosophy was created by Dr. Maria Montessori, and she was first and foremost a doctor, and she was an incredible powerhouse of a woman. She was working in the kind of late 1800s. She wanted to be a doctor at a time when women couldn't train to be doctors, and she managed to convince a medical college to allow her to come in after hours when all the male students had gone, and she basically self-taught alongside her tutors occasionally, and became one of the first 2 female doctors in Italy. The core of the approach is very much almost scientific. It's about observation, it's about allowing experimenting, it's a real stepping back as adults and letting children explore, make mistakes, learn from their mistakes, and almost be a guide rather than a teacher.
I read the book, I said it on my last podcast episode and I completely scrambled the title, but you know, the one that is something to do with the book you wish your parents had read and your children will be glad you read.
Yes, I've heard about that. Yeah.
You know the one. Yeah. In that they say about how parents aren't the doers and the children being the done to. Instead, it's more of a collaborative approach. So this seems to be in line with that, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it was through her, she was working in a hospital with women and children. The children that she was working with were kind of neurodivergent and heavily medicated at the time because there was not as much understanding as we have in today's society about how to support individual children in that way. And through her observations, she noticed that actually in that very clinical, bleak adult space of a hospital, essentially, the children had very little stimulation. They weren't able to do things for themselves. And she noticed that children were kind of seeking out stimulation. So during, supper time, they would play with their food because they just wanted some sensory experience, wanted to be able to handle things for themselves. So it was out of observations in those spaces that she realised actually rather than the adults imparting, in this case, kind of medication and the children being in an adult space, that the environment needs to be child-led. It needs to be accessible to them. It needs to be interesting and engaging. And actually it's the children's education and how adults are facilitating that really leads to them flourishing. If we can support them to be independent, Montessori talks about not doing for children what they can do for themselves. And that kind of resonates for me as an adult. If I'm trying to do something and someone just comes in and does it for me or says, you're doing it wrong, I'll do this, it's incredibly frustrating. Yeah. And for children who are just learning how the world works and quite enjoy that process of, that didn't work, perhaps I'll try this. And that perseverance and, resilience is an important life skill too. So, definitely the child-led space for me, in my experience of working at a nursery and now as a mum, is so empowering for them. And it's amazing to see what they can achieve actually when we step back.
Yeah, and that didn't quite come naturally to me because if I see Bonnie struggling with something, my first inclination is to go and jump in and help. And
of course, because we love them and we want to help. Yeah.
I think I saw online the analogy of if you were at the gym and trying to lift a weight and someone came over and said, oh, that's a bit heavy for you, let me do it, you would be kind of frustrated, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
so you've got
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, you touched on the point on education, and that's actually my second question is how does the Montessori approach to education differ in the school or a nursery environment?
The key element is it's child-led as opposed to adult-led. And I think just that term alone, I think there's misconceptions about what that looks like. I've heard people say, isn't Montessori approach just a free-for-all? And on the other end of the spectrum, people have said, isn't that where no learning happens? You just make them do, tidy. Yeah. Neither of those are the case. But kind of somewhere in the middle is this idea of a community. The classroom is a community. And it's stepping away from this idea that our day is run by adults. So rather than there being, 9 o'clock, we do literacy. 10 o'clock, we can go in the garden. 11 o'clock, we have snack. In a Montessori learning environment, all of that's happening at the same time. So the shelves are laid out at child level. It's often a kind of open plan space, so the children can move freely as they want to. And then all the areas of learning are activities on the shelf. So there might be a kitchen space where there's pouring, and for slightly older children, there's cutting, and there's a creative space where there's gluing and art and painting. The children choose what they want to do. So Montessori observed that when children are doing things that genuinely interest them, that's come from their curiosity, they're far more engrossed, they're far more focused, and they're going to get more out of it. Because if you sit a group of, say, 15 to 20 children, particularly at kind of 3 years old, not all of them are going to want to learn letters at the same time, or numbers, or read a book, or do art. So you're going to have a mixture of children who genuinely are interested, and then you've got others who want to be doing something else. They want to be outside or having snack, and they're not focused. So then there's a balance between kind of managing the behaviour of the children who are frustrated, as well as trying to enable the learning for the children who want to be. So the space is very open. And not always the case, because sometimes physically the space won't allow. But in the nursery that I worked at, the front door opened out into a garden. So that door was open the whole day. There was always 1 or 2 members of staff outside, depending on how many children wanted to go out. And there's free flow between indoor and outdoor. So there's a real empowerment for children to choose what they want to do. And as the key person of a child, it's your role as the adult to observe, to see what their abilities are, what their interests, and then slowly you introduce things as you think they're going to be interested. So a child might be excelling at an activity and you think, oh, I bet they'd love to do this next one because it's going to be a little bit more challenging, but they know how to do it. Or it might be that you've noticed that they're not approaching a certain area of the classroom. So how can we engage them? What are their interests? What could we bring over to that space? So an example might be, I had a key child who was so uninterested in numeracy, and we were getting to the stage where he was moving up into reception, and his mum was a bit concerned that he didn't know his numbers, but he loved cars and he loved playing in the garden. So we made an obstacle course in the garden and then used the number materials, the sandpaper numbers, that's the Montessori approach, and we put them along the obstacle course, and he had to follow in the order of the numbers. And it was combining his interest with that element of learning that was perhaps missing from his holistic learning. So it's being creative and it's following them, because then it's fun and it's engaging.
This wasn't my next question, but I'm thinking now from another perspective. I imagine a concern you hear from parents is that if they're getting to do what they want all day, are they going to end up being a bit selfish, or are they not going to understand boundaries and rules, and that you don't always get what you want? How have you found that?
That's a very interesting point. So within that environment, there are ground rules, which both the adults and the children are expected to follow. But they're reinforced through role modelling of the adults, and they're reinforced through kind of positive reinforcement. There's not a kind of, I suppose, telling off in terms of the ground rules or boundaries, but it's being sensitive to the fact that understanding rules sometimes is a huge concept actually for children. So the most powerful way of doing it is role modelling, and also through repetition, reminding, and of course explaining that sometimes there are wider needs, I suppose, and that's part of this community idea, is this awareness, and this develops over time, kind of from 3 onwards. Is a big concept for children to understand, to step away from their own needs and understand that other people have needs too, but that's reinforced through this idea of interconnectedness with everyone in the space. So an example would be that once we finish with an activity, we put it back where we found it, because then it's ready for our friends to use. Or it might be, often in a Montessori classroom, you'll have floor mats or table mats, and that is that child's space to work with the activity. So if someone else comes over and wants to be in that space, there's a conversation about, actually, this is Rupert's turn, and then it will be your turn. So it's a real, boundaries are incredibly important. And I think that is a common misconception of this idea of free-for-all. But that freedom is within boundaries. And that's what the Montessori talks about. Is
it's like they learn a lot of respect as well for others.
Yes, and awareness and respect for others, and also the balance between their own needs and then the needs of everybody in the space. And that's the same with the family. If the child comes home and they want to do something, and a sibling needs to be at a class, or something else is happening, then it's being sensitive to that and explaining, right now, this needs to happen, but let's come back and we'll do it later. So it's being flexible, actually. And although children do need those boundaries and they are in a sensitive period for order, Montessori talks about sensitive periods where children are at the kind of most capable of learning something, or they're the most engrossed in something. Order is one of the first ones. And that comes from trying to understand the world around us. That predictability, routine, boundaries are all really important. But it's the role of us as adults to try and communicate those in a child accessible way. At the moment, so Rupert's just turned 1, and I've noticed a huge increase in a sense of frustration for him, which I'm trying to manage really delicately, because I want him, when he is verbal, to be able to communicate what he needs and to not be dismissed. But while he's non-verbal, it's very difficult. And today we had our first, I don't like the word tantrum. We had his first moment of complete overwhelmedness. And I ended up just sitting with him on the floor while he just screamed for 10 minutes. And then once he calmed down, we had a huge hug, and I explained what had happened, why I did what I did. It was to do with snack, and it was to do with throwing. And I was very sensitive about everything, but he had such huge emotions that he couldn't process. So it's elements like that. I've gone off on a tangent, sorry.
I told you they're never quick fire.
But yeah, so going back to the original point, there are boundaries, there are ground rules. It's just they are communicated positively rather than focusing on the unwanted behaviour. So it might be we use our walking feet rather than don't run. Let's use our quiet indoor voices rather than don't be loud or don't shout.
Because I'm at this stage now where I feel like I'm about to be saying no a lot, because obviously she only wants anything that's dangerous. So
that's quite an interesting point, actually, because a lot of people do say to me, so do you never say no to him? And I suppose, no, I don't. But I do enforce a boundary. So rather than just saying, no, stop it, or no, Rupert, I will get down to his level and I will say, I'm going to take this because this isn't safe. And it's my job to keep you safe. Let's find something else. But also, as a parent and as an educator, and this was something I found very challenging, because going back to your previous point, A, you want to help, and B, it is your role to keep them safe. So you kind of go into fight or flight mode, don't you, when there's an element of danger about to happen. But sometimes I need to stop myself and think, is he genuinely in danger? Is that thing dangerous? Or is it just perhaps a little bit inconvenient to me because I can foresee what's going to happen and I can't be bothered to clear it up? And actually, that's a really important reflection. Like, if I do have time to clear it up, it's just a bit of an effort. That's my stuff to deal with. I need to be allowing Rupert to explore, to make those mistakes. And actually, sometimes he surprises me at how well he handles something, or that it does end up with a mess, or it does end up broken or whatever. And we clear it up together. So he begins to understand that whole process and cause and effect, I suppose, which they're all really interested in at this young age. I think we're both around the same age. So if you are feeling like you're saying no a lot, it is quite helpful sometimes to just pause and think, do I need to? Or can I just offer guidance? Does that feel safe? Do you feel safe?
Actually, that's a way of putting it, because I keep saying either no or be careful, be careful.
Yes. I know. Be careful is an interesting one. A lot of things out there at the moment, and certainly I've come across them of challenging this idea of just saying be careful, because actually it's not particularly helpful as a phrase. Be careful of what?
Look, okay, I'm still going to put my fingers in this plug, Mum.
Exactly. But no, so it's a balance. There definitely are moments where we do need to step in, but I think to avoid the frustration or the confusion, it's explaining why. Always. I found that very empowering for children. And moments where I think Rupert might completely feel overwhelmed, the moment I explain something, even as young as 1, is definitely, there's definitely awareness of what I'm saying and an understanding. And he seems to just calm, and then we move on. So that's been a really useful tool for me.
So did that start around the age of 1, would you say? Because obviously I'm only about a month behind at the moment.
No. Literally only in the last couple of weeks, we've had, this real frustration. And I found it, I saw a quote the other day, which I think I shared on my Instagram, of it's not the child's job to get calm. It's our job to stay calm for them. That emotional maturity, we shouldn't really expect children to be able to process their emotions until they're kind of 7. So the expectation that, that children should be able to monitor how they're feeling and process and rationalize their big feelings is like asking 2-month-old to walk. Developmentally, it's just not realistic. So it's definitely a journey, and I feel myself feel it for him, actually, which is an interesting thing as a parent. As an educator in the classroom setting, I found it much easier to distance myself in those moments of kind of negotiation and an explanation. But when it's your own son or your own child, it feels very different. So that's been an interesting reflection for me, not to get caught up in it.
Yeah, I'd love to get onto that, actually. Right, let's get into question 4, but us will never get through these questions. What age range does the Montessori method typically cover?
Really, it's birth to 6 is the most known part of the curriculum. Maria Montessori did design a philosophy and a curriculum for kind of 6 to 18. But obviously, once you get to that age range, commonly across the world, there tends to be a kind of stricter curriculum that all children are working through. And of course, there's exams, whatever shape they take in whichever country. And the idea of taking an exam, of being tested on knowledge, is quite far removed from the principles of Montessori. She talked about actually that later stage of education being about learning curriculum topics through real life. So in her context, it was, kind of hands-on experiences, learning chemistry through mixing things. Or I can't give a good example, but in the same way that we're looking at giving children life skills at this early stage of 0 to 6, it's then looking at learning biology by researching as being something that's interesting to the child, and then within that you can cover physics and chemistry and geography and history. But yes, so the most known and facilitated age range is 0 to 6. And Montessori talked about this concept of vertical grouping. So children of a mixed age range are in the same classroom together. And within her thoughts of kind of child development and how they progressed, she kind of compartmentalized 0 to 3 and 3 to 6 as needing similar environments to flourish. So they're kind of often the split. And then you have this wonderful environment where you've got older children teaching or demonstrating how to do things alongside the educators, and you've got the younger children looking up to the older children and observing them and learning through observation without anyone showing them how to do anything. And it's this real beautiful, harmonious environment. And of course there's clashes, but it's managing that. And again, that kind of links back to this development of empathy, of awareness, of different people's needs. So that's the common Montessori learning environment that we come across. So the kind of nursery age.
And what I'm kind of taking from what you're saying about the whole approach and the philosophy is that as a parent, you're not going to just switch that off at 6 years old either. You're going to have some core principles that are going to see you right through to 18 and beyond anyway.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's, an interesting point, and it kind of links back to what we were saying about I gave the example of the little boy needing to have some time looking at numbers before he moves up to the big school. And that is a common concern of parents, that, are they ready for big school? And in conversations I've had with parents as an educator, I'd always talk about, the literacy and the numeracy, of course, is important, but they will learn that, and it is reinforced from reception onwards. So actually, in these early years, what's important is, are they confident in their learning? Have they got a love of learning? Are they aware of how being in a community works? Can they put their coat on themselves? Can they put their shoes on themselves? Sending them off into the world, having this sense of independence and confidence in themselves and confidence in their abilities, for me, felt far more important than, can they count to 10 and do they know their alphabet?
Yeah, because it seems like that's the whole foundation that you're building for them to then flourish within a school setting and to learn how to learn. Yes.
And I think that's the biggest thing to take through life, isn't it? An interest in just being interested, actually, and curious. I think, sending children off into life with curiosity and interest and intrigue is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question, number 5. What are the key resources or your favourite books for parents who are interested in Montessori to learn a little bit more?
So there's a fantastic book called The Montessori Baby by Simone Davies and Unifa Uzadike. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But they've written this incredible book that I used. Actually, I read in pregnancy before I had Rupert. And I feel that for people who are just exploring Montessori, even if they're children, there's also the Montessori toddler as well. But that for me was really useful in kind of honing in on actually what are the key aspects that I want to bring at home. And you can kind of flick to certain things, certain milestones that might be happening in your child's life, and they suggest ways to approach them. So the Montessori Baby and the Montessori Toddler, I would highly recommend, both at home and I suppose understanding it if your children are already at Montessori nursery. It's quite useful because that's a key element too, is having that consistency. If you've got an environment where your children are going to a nursery where their expectations and the ground rules are a certain way, and then they're coming home and they're different, that's quite challenging for the children to kind of adapt between the environments. So as much as possible, having an element of consistency between the two is very empowering for the children, and it makes that sensitivity for order. They kind of understand, okay, this is how the world works.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to just jump into you and your story, your motherhood journey. I'm coming up to Bonnie being 1 year old. And so I'm really reflecting on how I am parenting versus how I thought I would parent, or my expectations in pregnancy. But I find it really interesting to speak to people who are educators or they really work with children. I mean, you have a psychology master's, so I imagine there might be lots of different levels where you've worked with children and you expected to be one kind of mum, or you know all of this about Montessori, but there might be different things in practice. But let's go right back to the start and tell me, did you always want children? What was your journey to becoming a mother?
Yeah. Yes. No. I always envisaged myself as a mother, and actually, this part of life I'd always really looked forward to. I trained as a Montessori educator nearly 10 years ago now. My original career was in something completely different, and I needed a career change. And I came across Montessori, and it was just so in keeping with my own values and ethos and how I want to be with other people, how I view the world. And I thought, this is incredible that this is an approach to education that we can, facilitate for a whole generation of children. I was instantly passionate about it and became a classroom educator. And then I was a deputy manager for a setting in the UK. And then just before we moved to Dubai, I went back to the teacher training college where I trained and joined the academic team and was working alongside them with their blended learning. And I tutored a bit and kind of lectured for some of the trainee teachers. So I'd kind of approached it from both being with the children and then also having those really interesting debates and discussions with people who were training to become Montessori educators. And that I found really interesting because you have people coming with completely different ideas, perhaps challenging or questioning approaches within the Montessori. And part of being a Montessori educator is learning to be self-reflective, of not just, this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, this is how we're going to do it forever. Of course, there's the key philosophy and the key aspects, but different voices, different cultures, different, perspectives are all really important. So that I really enjoyed. And yes, then last year in September, became mum to Rupert, which I can't believe was a year ago. It feels like yesterday. But then again, he feels like such a different person than who I first met a year ago, that it almost feels longer. And I think there was a kind of misconception amongst my friends that I'd know what I was doing because it's my job.
Yeah.
But that kind of infant newborn stage was completely new to me. And I did find myself thinking, right, when could we get the sandpaper letters out? Just calm down a second. What on earth can I do with him that is Montessori, I suppose, was my my first thought. But I think that was a really useful focus for me, of almost using my knowledge of the Montessori approach as this safety net of thinking, okay, what would Montessori do? Is what I kept saying to myself. And I did take a lot of time of just lying next to him on a mat under a mobile, watching him. And even now, I have days where I think, we should really do something. And then I look and think, but he is, and I'm just sitting with him on the floor watching him. And he has moments where he'll, go off and look back to me because he's found something and he's really excited about it. And I give him a big smile. And then he turns around and he carries on. He's just kind of looking for that reconnection as opposed to, come play with me. And I think that's the power of observation for parents. I think, and kind of going back to what we were saying about wanting to help, I think as adults, we feel like we need to be fun and engaging and leading the play and, look at this and this is how this works and which has a purpose and, is wonderful that children have parents who want to engage with them. But also it's then thinking that actually perhaps that play is ours, we're leading it. So if we step back and allow children to explore, choose the activity, play with it how they want to, there's no expected outcome of that play. It's just exploring. And then almost learning your children's cues as to whether they want you to be involved or not. Sometimes Rupert will bring a toy to me, and for me, that's the indication that he wants me to engage with it. Or he comes and he gives me a big hug, and that's kind of, okay, he needs a little moment of reconnection, and then he's off again.
I do need to get some personal advice because my little one is, she's definitely high needs koala. She's very clingy to me at the moment. And she doesn't have the best attention span. I mean, she is 11 months old. She is not going to sit there and play with her toy for very long at all. And so to me, it feels quite hard to do this Montessori method because she's just so easily bored and on the go and go and wants to be on me all the time. And I want to put her down and let her explore. And she doesn't seem quite up for it at the moment. So I wonder where I'm going wrong, what I could do.
You're not going wrong at all. Just a kind of few initial thoughts would be, I know for Rupert, he certainly doesn't play by himself all the time. And the moment he might be completely engaged in something, and I think, well, I'm just going to step back and I'm going to go and make a cup of tea or just finish, loading the dishwasher. The moment he hears me doing something else, he's over and he wants to be picked up. So I think that is very developmentally normal. Okay. And also they go through phases of slight separation anxiety. It might be teething, anything that's going on that makes them feel a bit unsure. They seek that connection from us. And although, if I'm completely honest, it sometimes does feel very exhausting, I always do try and meet that need for him. More recently, literally in the last 2 weeks or so, I've just slightly started setting boundaries around it, just in terms of if he is playing and I'm doing some washing up and he comes over and he puts his arms up, I acknowledge that he's there and I say, I can see you want to be picked up. I'm just finishing washing up and then I will pick you up. Okay. And I just kind of keep repeating, if he audibly isn't happy about that situation, I just keep reinforcing, finish washing up, then I'll pick you up. And sometimes I've found that he'll distract himself and he'll go off and he'll find something, but I still follow through on my word. So once I have finished, and I'm always just kind of aware that I'll do just one more, not make him wait for half an hour. I will then find him and sit on the floor. I won't pick him up with, if he's distracted himself, I'll give him that time. But I will get down on the floor near him so that he can see that I'm ready for that cuddle if he still wants it. So that's a kind of new thing for us, that setting of boundaries, because it is hard. We do need to get stuff done in the home, and also kind of introducing this idea that there's a bit of give and take, I suppose, but that their need will always be met, if you know what I mean.
Really interesting to me, because I am at the stage where I need to think about those boundaries. So it's interesting that you got on that, because I am breastfeeding a very hungry girl. I'm co-sleeping and she is very clingy to me. So there is no boundary right now.
But no, I think I found, so we haven't ever done any like sleep coaching or anything. And there were moments around 6 or 7 months I kind of questioned whether I should, because I was so tired, and he was definitely going through a phase of separation anxiety at nighttime, and he was waking up like every hour. But I knew, for me, and I know it works for everybody, it works for some people, and there's absolutely no judgment, but for me, I just didn't want to. Just to kind of preface that, at 6 months, we moved him to his own room because we found he was in a next to me crib up until that point. And we'd always envisaged that he might sleep with us till 1. But around 6 months, we noticed that we were all keeping each other up and none of us were getting any sleep. And he'd been napping in his own room for about a month leading up to that. So we thought we'd just give it a try. There was no pressure on it. If he was super unhappy, we'd absolutely move him back in. But we found he slept the best he'd slept in 6 months. So we were like, brilliant. And he was very happy. And he's in a Montessori floorbed, so he can get in and out of his bed as he wants. So during that separation anxiety time, I would go and I'd lie next to him. I'd settle him back to sleep. And actually, I found pretty quickly he moved through it. And reflecting back on it, I thought, I'm so pleased that I did that, because he was obviously needing that reassurance. And because he got it consistently, he's kind of moved through it. And now he sleeps almost through the night.
I'm thinking about it more as well at the moment, because in terms of the sleep, because she's co-sleeping, but she wants to be attached to me all night. I want to give her that comfort, but then I've realized that I can't then be the mum that I want to be if I haven't slept all night. So it's definitely front of my mind at the moment, the boundaries.
Yes. Yeah.
How are you finding the Montessori floor bed then? Because you're going to laugh, but we un-Montessori'd the floor bed. You put it in then.
Oh, did you? That's brilliant. So tell me about that process, if you don't mind.
Her into a cot because, I mean, as soon as I move her away from me at all, she would wake up, let alone head on the mattress.
Okay.
So we thought it would probably be a better way to be able to put her down, at least just for naps, which is what she's doing at the moment. But we're in rented accommodation where we can't screw everything to the walls.
Right.
And she obviously goes straight for anything dangerous. We've put the floor bed in a playpen.
Okay. We initially did start him in a crib, but literally for about 2 weeks, because during conversations with my husband when I was pregnant, I said, well, of course, we're going to put him in a floor bed. And my husband said, actually, I don't know that I feel very comfortable with that, because what if he gets out, or what if he rolls off and hits his head? And I could tell that my husband felt very passionately about it and was very concerned. And actually, I thought it's far better for both of us to feel comfortable with what's going on than one of us kind of forcing something. So we initially started with the crib, but at the time we were rocking Rupert to sleep, and then he wanted to kind of snuggle as he fell into a deeper sleep. So we both found ourselves kind of bent over the side of the crib with our head on the mattress, trying to, putting our backs out, trying to get him settled. So it just wasn't working for us. So we initially then took one side off the crib because it was a convertible one. So he had the kind of three sides remaining, with the normal cot mattress, which was quite small. And we found that he was waking up because he couldn't do a complete roll. He was almost waking himself up because he couldn't move as he needed to. And then he started rolling off the mattress and kind of ended up on the carpet, and he'd stay asleep for a little bit, bless him, but then he'd kind of wake up when he realised what had happened. So we then got a single bed mattress on the floor, but he just kept rolling off. So we found a brilliant IKEA bunk bed hack, that it can either be a raised bed, a four-poster bed, or you flip it upside down and it's a bunk bed with a kind of desk space underneath. So this hack was to have it as the four-poster, but not to put the slats on the raised bit, but just have them on the floor and then put the mattress on top. So you've got this kind of slight kind of high side, and then you don't put the rungs of the ladder in, and that becomes your little entrance and exit. Okay. So he still has that freedom of movement, but he's a bit more contained so that he doesn't roll out. And for us, it's worked brilliantly because we just lie comfortably next to him. He falls asleep, and I'm so grateful. We do have nights where he wakes up a lot, but on the whole, going to sleep is a really positive experience. I crawl into bed. We have his little sleeping bag out with the dummy, and he crawls in after me, finds his dummy, and we then I kind of breastfeed him before he goes to sleep, and we have a remote control on the light. So he has the light switch, and once we finish breastfeeding, he turns off the light, and then we're kind of into falling asleep. So there's a lot of control and ownership over bedtime for him.
That's interesting. Maybe that's something I could implement with Bonnie, the just turning the light off, although she doesn't like the dark. So she'll just say no.
It's a really interesting age, because there's obviously a development of real knowing what they want and what they don't want. But being non-verbal at the moment is incredibly frustrating for them, I think, because they want to be able to tell us, and they can't. Actually, the kind of bottom line for me as a mother is it's all been an experiment. It's been trial and error. And it's, I think, having the confidence that even if you try something, it doesn't work and you have to change it, it's not going to impact massively. Actually, that process is almost more important for the children to then find the right fit for everybody than kind of sticking to one thing, because if I change it, then I'm going to have to stick with that thing,
Yeah.
So trial and error has been a big thing for us.
And was that something that was surprising to you, or was there any aspect that seemed very different when you actually were living this as a mother, as an educator?
I think definitely the trial and error and experimenting and not everything being perfect was a real eye-opener for me, because as a Montessori educator, of course, there's this, I am a perfectionist as a person, but I've never imparted that on the children that I work with. But I did notice as a mother that there was an expectation that I needed to be perfect, because A, I should know what I'm doing, and B, I've got to fulfill this Montessori approach that I'm, sharing and feel so passionately about. But actually, sometimes I do things that I think I could have handled that differently. But I learn from it. And I think going back to that idea of self-reflection, at the end of the day, just having a little moment of thinking, oh, that went so well. I was so pleased that he achieved that, or I'm so pleased that I took that moment to step back. But then equally thinking, actually, do you know what? That didn't go as I feel it could have. How can I adjust it? An example of that recently is I'd noticed that at the end of every meal, we put up a little mirror for him, and I've tried wet wipes, I've tried flannels, I've tried hot water, I've tried cold water, but he just hates washing his hands and having his face washed. And we sing a little song, and I demonstrate on myself, and then I do it him. Nothing was kind of changing his mind. And I then noticed at the end of every meal, the moment I got up from the table to run the tap, he started crying. And I thought, this isn't okay. So what can we do differently? So now he's just learning to walk. So he's not standing by himself, but he'll, can hold on to things, and he's very strong on his legs. So I thought, perfect, we'll get a step. We'll put it in the downstairs bathroom. We've set up a little soap for him. We've set up a little flannel on a peg, and I help him up on the step. We run the tap, which he's fascinated by, and, we wash his hands together. And now it's a much happier experience. And that was one thing that every day I thought, oh, it's such a shame that that's how we're ending the meals. But it kind of took a while for me to realize what the alternative could be. I think that's it. It's not perfect. And actually, we're all muddling through.
Yeah. And it seems like you're teaching him to relate to others as well, and to have that compassion and not expect you to always be perfect anyway. So
yes,
I think
that's very true.
That went very well. So did you have Rupert here in Dubai?
I did, yes. We had a very long summer here. And very heavily pregnant. We were going to travel home, but it all felt kind of too much at the time. So had him here at King's. I felt very fortunate actually to have had the pregnancy and to have had him here. It took a while for us to conceive him. So although the pregnancy was, I was very fortunate to have a very trouble-free pregnancy, there was still a slight element of anxiety of everything. But, the care that you get and the amount of scans and appointments, and I was very grateful for. So then had Rupert in a very hot, humid September. My mum came out for kind of 3 weeks when he was just born, and had that support, which was kind of invaluable at that time. And I had an emergency C-section, so I was kind of even more immobile than I had anticipated. It's an interesting one being an expat and having a baby out here. I do feel an element of, guilt, I suppose, actually, that we're bringing him up away from our families. But this summer was an incredible example, actually, and reassuring for me at how much of a bond he still has with our parents, even though we're so far apart. But yes, I do wish we lived closer, just to be nearer with them, and also for the support system. I'm fortunate to be a stay-at-home mum with him, but we haven't got any help and no family around us, but we've got some wonderful friends who helping as we go along. So and that's it. I think it's the friends that you make around you that become invaluable, particularly when you start a family.
Yeah, it's so important as an expat, isn't it, to build your own sort of family here in Dubai. Absolutely. And how do you feel about being in Dubai long term and him maybe schooling here compared to the UK?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic and one that my husband and I, talk a lot about. I think there's definitely times when I think, oh, I'd love to be back home. And, we were in the Cotswolds over the summer and both me and my husband went, oh, we could move back in. There was a vegetable patch and beautiful countryside. But then, of course, you come back to Dubai and you've got the beautiful sunshine and pools and the beach. And, when the weather cools down, the quality of life here is amazing. And I think for Rupert, to be able to socialize with such a mixture of cultures and religions, different perspectives, or far more diverse group of people, which I think is an incredible gift to give to children. And then travel too. Travel from here is far easier than from the UK. And I think to go on adventures together, I'm really excited about that. And it feels very safe. And there's so many things that are family orientated in Dubai that I'm really excited about kind of getting involved in when he's a bit older. So no, I feel very positive about bringing him up here, and then having the balance of going back to England in the holidays will be a nice combination.
Yeah, absolutely. So we finished the podcast with 2 segments. Firstly, a dilemma and then a recommendation. So I'd like to know, is there a dilemma that you hear from a lot of different mums that you as an expert can give some insight into? Well,
it's interesting because we have touched on it about the boundaries of that age when children start to kind of push back a little bit. That has been a topic of conversation with quite a few of my friends of things like Rupert, for example, has occasionally starts hitting, and it's, for me, was a real shock, actually. I kind of knew it, knew these elements were coming, but I was in the same boat as my friends where they're kind of looking at their children going, what is going on? Who is this person? And that was the kind of, first dilemma for me of, okay, I can observe that this is a behaviour that we need to address, but I want to make sure that I do it in a way that feels the most authentic for me, and is going to be the most supportive for Rupert. So that was the first thing, actually, was the boundaries around unwanted behaviour. I'd noticed that he would hit me when he was excited. So it might have been around the time of a meal time, or we were going to breastfeed and I was holding him and he'd kind of hit my chest. But he's a really strong boy. And I also noticed with friends when they were playing, he'd get so excited about seeing them that he'd just like hit them on the head. And it wasn't, I was, or kind of grab their shirt and squeeze. Yeah. It's like a real love thing. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to reinforce this idea of gentle hands. So I've never said to Rupert, no, don't hit. We've always said we use gentle hands, and we would demonstrate, whether that's on the cat or on, I'd say gentle hands on mummy. You can see him pause and kind of take it in, and then he'd probably hit me again. If it's then hitting me or hitting a friend, it's kind of taking a moment to acknowledge the person that has been hit, as opposed to focusing on Rupert and the unwanted behaviour. So if he'd hit a friend and the friend started crying, I would go over to the friend with Rupert, not ignoring him, but say, oh, you've been hit, are you okay? And then, saying to Rupert, let's check that they're okay. And role modelling that empathy. And, if they are really distraught or they have been scratched or there's a bump or whatever, being active in making that better. So going and getting a cold flannel and holding it on their face for them, or perhaps putting a hand on them or giving them a hug or whatever it is that, the child would appreciate, because obviously that's going to differ from child to child. So I think it's important to reinforce the empathy and take the focus away from the hitting, because sometimes if we give children a big reaction to a certain behaviour, it almost becomes fun, or there's a sense of excitement around the big reaction. So it's trying really hard to stay very neutral, to stay very calm, and to be quite factual in what's happening. I can see that you've been hit. Are you okay? And then if it continues, the advice that I was given was to say, it was in context of hitting me, of saying, I'm not going to let you hit me. I'm going to put you down. And when you're ready, we can, whatever it is you're going to do, we can eat the meal, we can play, we can breastfeed. So it's an acknowledgement of the behaviour being unwanted, and giving a consequence to it, but gently. It's also kind of staying in their presence. It's not leaving them by themselves or a naughty step or go to your room. It's still being really present and emotionally supportive for them. But yeah, so that's our kind of approach at the moment. And I can let you know how it goes.
Yeah, do. Yeah. And then in terms of recommendations, you've already given me some really good recommendations. What I think I've learned from speaking to you is that this is very much aligned with my philosophy as a parent, and that actually reading the two books that you mentioned, the Montessori Toddler and the Montessori Baby, this is just going to give me those tips for in the moment when I don't really know how to react, because we are also very sleep deprived. So it'd be quite nice to read something that tells me exactly what to do that is in line with my philosophy. But did you have any other recommendations, or is that what you'd like to recommend today?
I think kind of in keeping with that thought, my kind of recommendation, and something that I found really useful, creating an environment that is child-led and child-friendly, is a yes space for children. You're going to come up against fewer moments of contention, because actually the children are able to follow their interests, to explore, and they're not constantly being stopped or told no, which is frustrating, both for us as the adult to have to keep managing the situation, and also for them thinking, what can I do in this space? So a big recommendation of mine would just be to consider the environment, whether that's just their bedroom or if it's, the whole space of your home. How accessible and friendly is it to children? Can you move things up that are dangerous so that actually they can be free on the floor, and the kind of physical environment aspect? And then Montessori talks about the spiritual environment of the adult, of being respectful, of being kind, of being supportive. And I think my biggest recommendation would be to take those moments of reflection and think, what went really well today, and what would I like to change? Not what did I do wrong, but what do I want to change? Because I don't think we're ever really doing anything wrong. We're acting in the moment. We're using our own experience of childhood or our instincts. But sometimes those can be adapted.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. And anyone listening along, please do follow and rate and subscribe and all those things. You can find me at nextofkin.ae on Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you.